Hi, my name is Jan Henry, and as already said, I'm a PhD student at Porsche from Germany. Welcome to Story-Driven. Imagine a world where stories evolve and adapt to their surroundings. Now, what would this look like? Let's have a look at this example set in the beautiful city of Vienna.
Under the watchful gaze of Pallas Athena, the goddess of wisdom, Elise Adler and Marcus Vogel approached the majestic Parliament building.
Can we fix that? We can try again, but I guess.
Under the watchful gaze of Pallas Athena, the goddess of wisdom, Elise Adler and Marcus Vogel approached the majestic Parliament building, its architecture a testament to a bygone era of enlightenment and grandeur.
Okay, I guess you got the point now. So, what did we just see? So, as the user approaches the Parliament building in Vienna, we can hear about two characters from the story, from the audiobook, basically arriving at this exact location. And this is what Story-Driven does. It synchronizes the fictitious audiobook with the real world in real time. Now, where do we come from with this project? So, today traveling is often made much more convenient with audio content. You can just plug in your headphones and listen to music, to podcasts, to audiobooks. With generative AI, such as large language models, this can be elevated to the next level. Generated music and automated storytelling have been proven to be feasible and more or less enjoyable as well. Now, mobile environments come with fast-changing context. That is both challenge and opportunity for creating context-aware user experience. And this has been done before with music, but there are much more ways to synchronize the virtual and the real world. With Story-Driven, we address this gap as we propose a novel method for context-synchronized storytelling. Now, how did we implement this? Well, let's have a closer look at the example of Vienna. In this example, the user may want to explore the historic sites of Vienna at this specific route. Now, to incorporate these real-world locations into the fictitious story, we need to first identify all points of interest along the user's route. Therefore, we calculate a bounding box along the route and gather all points of interest inside this bounding box, based on OpenStreetMap data. Now, particularly in Vienna, there are way too many interesting locations to include all of them in a meaningful story. So therefore, we have to filter these points of interest by different criteria, such as a relevance score, which is calculated for each building, and the temporal distance between 2 points of interest to respect the story structure. Now, with our final points of interest narrowed down, they are guaranteed to be integrated feasibly into the story. And this is done with the help of a story plan. So the story plan is based on the arc of suspense and therefore consists of basically 5 chapters. These 5 chapters are oriented at the 5 steps of the arc of suspense, namely exposition, rising action, peak, falling action, and resolution. Now we divide all of the points of interest we gathered before among the different chapters, and if the route is longer, we create like sub-chapters for each point of interest. Now, as you can see, the first and the last chapter are left without point of interest. This is done to enable a meaningful introduction and conclusion to the story. And according to this structure, we can now generate a story outline with the help of a large language model. This story outline is basically a list of bullet points that describes the plot of the story and effectively what happens after each other. And following this outline, we can then generate the full story chapter by chapter, again with the help of a large language model. Here, we already incorporate estimate timings. So the chapter length that is generated depends on the average timings of the user. So say the user will arrive in roughly 2 minutes at the first point of interest, well then the chapter is going to be roughly of 2 minutes length. Now we have our plan and our structure, but if we stick to that as the user starts traveling, this would most likely not go well, because there's things like when we're in cars, traffic jams, when we're on foot, there can be crowded areas. There are going to be some delays, and this synchronization is not going to be synchronized anymore. And therefore, we kind of need to guarantee this alignment of real-world places and dimension in the fictitious story to allow the user to actually associate what the user can see, so the visual perception, with what the user can hear, with what he listens to, the audio content. Therefore, we continuously calculate an estimated time of arrival at the next point of interest. So let's say in this example, the user takes about 50 seconds to reach the next point of interest. We also calculate an ETM. That is what we call the estimated time of mention of exactly this location in the fictitious story. And as soon as we realize the ETM and the ETA, they are too far away from each other, so the difference gets too large, we can start editing our story. So it is AI generated, so we can just cut content from it. But if we were to continue the story from this point on, that would not make much sense, because there would be some sort of plot hole and the user would get lost. Therefore, we regenerate this chapter from this point on new with the help of a large language model. And therefore, we can, again, have this alignment, so ETA and ETM are adjusted accordingly. So this is what Story-Driven does, and I hope this clears this up a little bit. We evaluated our system. We conducted a real-world study in 2 different cities with 30 participants. We conducted a comparative user study where we compared our system, the context-aware condition, against the baseline story, which is a linear generated story without any real-world locations. The baseline basically is a generated story taking place at fictitious locations with no adjustments along the right. And as we can see here, we have the actual study route, which is roughly a length of 25 minutes. On one way, we would deploy our story-driven system, and on the way back, we would deploy the baseline condition. So we compared the systems in alternating order, obviously, to prevent user bias. And in the questionnaires after every condition, we mainly measured user experience, narrative engagement, and geographic perception. As you can see, our system scored much better than the baseline, thankfully. We had significantly higher scores in the user experience questionnaire, and also significantly improved narrative engagement. I want you to notice the different subscales of the narrative engagement scale, because on the one side, well, we have a better overall score, which is great. We also have improved narrative presence, which is significantly better, which shows the user actually is more engaged and more present in the narrated story. And I also want to notice the attentional focus subscale, because this lines up pretty well with a lot of qualitative feedback we got from participants, where participants mentioned that in instances where they were not paying attention, the mention of a real-world location brought them back into the story. So in case they wandered off or drifted off and maybe didn't remember what happened in the last minutes, they were brought back by the mention of a real-world location. I mentioned we also queried geographic recollection. What this means is basically we asked the users what locations they remembered from the story. So first, free from memory, and then they could pick from a list just to prevent biasing them. And as you can see, again, our system provides much better results than the baseline with fictitious places. So what we can conclude from that is not only does the inclusion of context improve immersion, but it also makes the experience much more memorable and easier to understand and to follow. So to summarize, what did we do? With Story-Driven, we created an experienceable end-to-end system for generative storytelling in mobile environments. The system merges mobile real-time context into a context-synchronized immersive experience. And we also introduced a novel method that writes and adopts stories based on contextual information and timing. We then validate that method in both a simulator setting and several real-world scenarios. Finally, we evaluate the system in 2 real-world user studies to assess the user experience compared to the before-mentioned baseline system. Now, with Story-Driven, we took first steps into synchronizing virtual and real worlds. However, there are much more possibilities to further blur the line between fiction and reality. Immersive experiences can strongly benefit from context awareness, and I'm very much looking forward to continue my research on this topic and to explore different modalities and new types of immersive experiences. Now, if you have any thoughts about this yourself or any other questions regarding the topic, I'm happy to answer them now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brian Smith. Thanks for the great work and talk from Columbia University. My question is, what motivated you to focus on fiction using sort of physical features as visual supports for the fiction rather than go more all in towards appreciating the physical surroundings themselves, the history of the buildings, things like that?
Well, I mean, it is not all of it is fiction, right? Because we integrate these real-world locations. So the story itself might be fictional, but the places are real. So if I get this right, it's not really the plot is fictional, but the places are real. So I guess we could have modified like an existing story for that, like a user-written story, or is this going in the right direction?
Yeah, like you mentioned in Italian, like a Renaissance facade in one of the stories, and there was a building that had a Renaissance facade, but that was kind of the only feature from that building that was incorporated in the story, rather than the history or function of the building. So it's not what motivated you there.
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. That theme also was followed the full story. So considering the story outline is generated by a large language model, the large language model already knows where the story takes place and accordingly generates the story fitting to these locations. So it is some sort fictional, but it does integrate all of these historic things into the story.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, James Egan, Institut Polytechnique de Paris. This was really nice work. I really appreciated it.
Thank you.
Have you thought about alternate approaches? So this was a sort of an exocentric data story that you're telling. Have you considered something more like a sort of like having a background personal narrator as you're driving through this that's describing your own experiences in the context of what's going on?
So with a personal narrator, you mean what exactly?
Like, so I'm thinking of something like, for example, the movie Stranger Than Fiction, where you have like a narrator who's narrating your life and describing and bringing in details to your surroundings, basically making it more of an endocentric personal situation as opposed to, just some exocentric story that happens for somebody else's life.
Okay, so if I get this right, you mean to incorporate probably more details about the user as well, and more information than just the locations?
So okay. Where basically the main character of the story is the person driving the car, as opposed to...
Well, not exactly. So that I couldn't mention that in the presentation as well, but there are characters, fictional characters are generated along with the story. So the user itself is not part of the story, but the user experiences the story as he follows it along. And I guess what you mean is to incorporate the user actually into the story?
Right.
That is a good point. And I think it's a super exciting opportunity to further go on this, but it makes user evaluation really hard because you have like a lot of customization, a lot of personal attributes, and you can't really do anything comparative then anymore. But I think that's a great point, and I would love to do that in the future.
Thank you. I really look forward to seeing more of this.
Thank you.